Yeah, so I lost the script to this episode yesterday, because Murphy's Law is a real thing. I had to try and take it from the subtitles from our podcast on YouTube, but my husband was the one who originally read the story out, and he has a Dublin accent, and I do not. So this may not be verbatim, but it is another story, again, from the former warden of Larch Hill, Damien O'Sullivan. And I'm delighted that I get to tell it because it's not well known. And I think when we've heard a story 1,000 times told by many different people, we tend to become desensitized to how scary or spooky or downright tragic it could be. So I hope this is your first time hearing it, and enjoy. Once upon a time, in fact it was during the Great War, so 1914 to 1918, Larch Hill was commandeered by the British Army to be used as a sanitarium for soldiers who were gassed in the trenches in Europe. Now, in the hospital was a very beautiful nurse with dark hair and eyes. She was well liked by patients and doctors alike. It wasn't an easy job, as some of the soldiers were not only gassed in the trenches, but also suffered from shell shock. In May of 1915, a group of casualties arrived in Larch Hill. These soldiers were in the trenches near to the front line during the Second Battle of Ypres. The battle had commenced in April, and that was the first time that the Germans had deployed a new deadly weapon, mustard gas. The nurse was assigned to take care of one poor soul, who had not only survived the gassing, he had also survived a blast from an artillery shell that had landed in the front of his trench position. All those close to him at the time had died in the blast, and he had lain there for 3 days under the corpses of his friends before he was found by medics. Needless to say, as a result of his experience, he was deeply mentally disturbed. The nurse tended to her casualty with due diligence and care. He, however, mistook this attention and begun to believe that she had fallen in love with him. This mistaken belief was to have tragic consequences for the beautiful nurse in the not too distant future, when what should have been a joyous day was suddenly transformed by tragedy. And so the months passed, and the casualty became more and more infatuated with the beautiful nurse. Each day he would entreat her to marry him, and each day she would gently rebuff and reject his entreaties. See, the nurse was engaged to be married to her one and true love, and their wedding day was rapidly drawing closer. Finally, the wedding day arrived, and there was a great excitement at Larch Hill. Everyone was talking about the event, and the nurses and porters began to move all the patients towards the front of the building so that they could see the nurse before she departed for the White Church. This is the church that can be seen from the Melbourne field. Meanwhile, the nurse prepared herself to travel to the church. With the help of her bridesmaids, she got her hair and makeup ready before donning her beautiful white dress and veil. One of the doctors agreed to loan his horse so the bride could travel in style to the service. The horse was brought to the front of the house, and after descending 4 granite steps to the main entrance, the nurse mounted the horse sitting side saddle and set off at a gentle pace. The patients, nurses and doctors cheered and applauded as they wished the bride good luck. There was a great air of happiness in Larch Hill, with one key exception: the besotted casualty. In those days, the way in and out of Larch Hill was different than today. When you came in the main gate, you took a sharp left up the hill, and when you reached the bow, you took a sharp right, followed across the avenue at the top of where the archery range is now, and turned left onto the existing road at the Melbourne Bend. Now, that information may seem useless to most of you, but some of you might be familiar with Larch Hill today, and it is important for later. Back to the story. The casualty could hear all the commotion, and when he inquired as to what was happening, he was shocked and dismayed to hear that the love of his life was leaving to wed another man. He resolved to stop her and sprinted out the back door. Meanwhile, the nurse moved slowly away from the house. The horse was a gentle mare, but even so, the nurse was unused to horse riding and was nervous. She continued anyway with a happy heart, knowing that her one true love was waiting at the altar at the church. The future looked good, as her fiancé had just started new employment as a teacher in a school that had been established by a man named Pierce, close to Whitechurch. The casualty moved quickly and swiftly despite his wounds and breathing problems, as he was determined to stop the nurse from leaving Larch Hill. He was soon beside a large beech tree, halfway between the house and the gate. Here he concealed himself, waiting quietly to intercept the nurse. The nurse continued on her way, smiling at the cheers and applause that had marked her departure. It was a beautiful day, and she looked radiant in her white dress against the backdrop of the blue sky. Her thoughts turned once again to her fiancé waiting at the church, hoping he was on time and not too nervous. She continued to be nervous herself, but took comfort in knowing in less than an hour she would be standing side by side, holding the hand of her one and only true love. Her heart fluttered at the thought, and she smiled. The horse rounded the bend, turning right, moving slowly along the avenue, heading to the main gate. Suddenly the horse halted, as ahead of them stood the casualty, blocking the path, waiting raving and shouting. The horse shuffled back, her nostrils flared with fright and her eyes wide open as she tossed her head in the air. The nurse struggled to control the mare, but alas, she wasn't strong enough, and the horse bolted left. In a split second, they were both tumbling down the slope towards the river. The nurse tried to hold on when she was smashed into a tree with great force and could feel her bones break as she fell to the ground. The mare tumbled on top of the nurse and crushed the remaining breath from her body. The casualty could not believe what just happened. He ran to the edge of the road and looked over the side. To his horror, he could see the nurse lying motionless at the bottom of the slope, her vacant eyes staring straight at him. He had seen this stare of death before in the trenches, and he knew she was dead. He let out a cry of anguish, as he never intended to harm the nurse, who he loved deeply. He was only on the road to make one last entreaty to the nurse to marry him. He collapsed into a heap, sobbing uncontrollably. Soon others arrived at the scene. They heard the awful pain neighing of the horse echoing around the valley. They could not believe the tragic scene that greeted them. Everyone was deeply upset. There was nothing left for them to do other than gather up the broken body of the nurse into their arms and lay her to rest in peace. However, as we all know, she was never to rest, and her poor, mournful spirit is seen wandering along the avenue above the archery range. She takes the same path every time, heading to the main gate, but disappearing before she can pass through. She is suffering an eternal, unrequited love, and is destined to haunt the road in her quest to get her fiancé and wed him. She means no harm, so if you happen to pass her as you wander the site at night, wish her well and walk on by.